All right, up next, well, I already introduced him last night, so I don't want to kind of repeat myself, but I will talk a little bit about him. He's coming up in a minute. He is the amazing Nick Redfern. As I like to say, he is truly a renaissance man of the paranormal. Just last night on the drive home, we were talking about the JFK assassination and UFOs, and he was just blowing our minds with some amazing stuff. And it was like, what does this guy not know? What? It's amazing. So tonight he's going to be talking to you about the chupacabra, which is, of course, a very mysterious and creepy animal down there in Latin America. And, of course, he has done some tremendous work looking into it. Ladies and gentlemen, Nick Redfern.
Thanks, everybody. As Tim said, I'm going to talk about this weird creature from Puerto Rico known as the chupacabra, which is a creature some of you may have heard of, some of you may not have heard of. Sort of a weird animal that sort of, I guess, straddles the paranormal as much as it does cryptozoology. And talking of cryptozoology, I'll just tell you what that basically is. In a nutshell, it's the study of unknown animals. As Lauren mentioned earlier, Bigfoot, the abominable snowman, creatures like that. Over the last, I won't say the last few years, but certainly a bit longer than that, it's also come to encompass creatures or animals that might not be animals. For example, in Britain we have a lot of legends of ghostly black dogs. Now, it's debatable whether or not they should fall in the category of cryptozoology, or if they should fall in the realm of ghost hunting. So we have that aspect of the subject, and also in England particularly, a lot of people who investigate cryptozoology will look into cases of so-called out-of-place animals. For example, Britain has a long history of sightings of big cats on the loose. Now, certainly there shouldn't be any large indigenous big cats in the British Isles, yet people see them. So, they're certainly not unknown animals, but they're known animals in the wrong place. So that also falls in the realm of cryptozoology for some researchers also. So it really is an area that, I guess, covers a whole range of creatures, semi-creatures, spectral creatures, however you want to define them. And even to this day, I'm not sort of sure really as to how the chupacabra itself falls into the subject of cryptozoology, and I'll explain to you what I mean by that as I go along. Just to give you a bit of background, the reason why I got interested in cryptozoology, long time ago, back in 1969, my parents took me on a week's holiday to Scotland, and we spent one day at Loch Ness. And of course, if you're going to go to Loch Ness, inevitably you're going to learn about the Loch Ness Monster. And I was only like 6 years old at the time, and sort of that age, obviously I wasn't running around investigating sightings of monsters. But my dad told me this story as we sort of stood on the shores of the loch about the Loch Ness Monster and what it was supposed to be. And I guess it kind of fired my interest and imagination, and got me thinking about the idea that, wow, monsters that you were told as little kids aren't real, just might be real. And so as I got older, I began to read books and magazine articles on it, and then when I finished school I worked on a music magazine in England, and did that for a couple of years. That folded, and then I thought, well, why don't I try and combine the interest in the paranormal with doing investigations and going out there and really trying to find out what lies at the heart of these mysteries. And so that's really what I did, and I run the US office now of this group, the Centre for Fortean Zoology. And for those who wonder what that means, Fortean, it's actually named after a man named Charles Fort, who was an early chronicler, like 100 years ago almost, of strange stories, everything from UFO sightings, ghosts, strange creatures, you name it. If it was weird, Fort collected information on it and published it in one of his several books that he put out many decades ago. And you can actually find them quite easy to find now. Their copyrights expired, so a lot of publishers are now putting Fort's books out there. And so the Centre for Fortean Zoology was set up in 1992 by a friend of mine, John Downs. That's John on the right there, in his home little village of Walsall in England, which is about a 600 or 700 year old village. And John actually grew up in Hong Kong. His dad was sort of a big figure in the British government in Hong Kong in the 1950s and 60s. And so growing up there, you know, he was exposed to, I guess, a lot of exotic wildlife, and that got his interest going. So when John's family moved back to England in the early 70s, he continued this interest and then set up the Centre for Fortean Zoology in the early 90s. And it sponsors and puts on various expeditions around the world in search of a whole variety of different creatures. So what happened was that about 10 years ago now, John got an invite from a British TV company to go to Puerto Rico to look for this creature that became known as the chupacabra. This was in the latter part of the 1990s, and it was actually only in the mid-1990s onwards, pretty much, that sightings of the chupacabra began to be reported. So it was a relatively new phenomenon back then, and he went out there for about 2 weeks, did an expedition, and then the two of us with another film crew went back in 2004. And I've been on several expeditions there now, so what I'm going to do is talk about the 2004 and 2005 expeditions I've done to Puerto Rico looking for this creature and try and hopefully come up with some ideas as to what it may be. There's various descriptions have been made of the chupacabra. That's, I guess, one of the most typical ones. It's sort of, I guess, almost like a monkey-like body, glowing red eyes, fangs, claws, vicious-looking creature. Sometimes, as you can see there, we've got spikes. I don't know if have I got a lighter pen? Yeah. There should be one here. Maybe not. Oh, here it is. As you can see, kind of like a spike on its head, or a sort of a punk rock mohawk or something like that. And that's the way a lot of people have described the chupacabra as looking. Now, chupacabra is Latin for goat sucker, because a lot of the animals that were initially reported killed by it were goats. There actually aren't a lot of indigenous large animals on the island of Puerto Rico, and because it's a relatively poor environment, a lot of people take to farming. Now, you know, when you talk about farms in America, if you compare them to farms over there, they're very different. You know, a farm might be literally somebody's backyard, which is just poorly fenced in, and animals tethered to poles, that sort of thing, like goats, pigs, etc. So, you know, you have this situation where a lot of the people have animals and they keep purely for food and hopefully to sell. So what happened was that in the sort of 93, 94, 95 era, you began to have reports surfacing in Puerto Rico from ranchers, just general people also, talking about their animals having been killed under what was perceived to be unusual circumstances. And some of the people talked about finding their animals dead with literally like 2 puncture wounds on the neck, and the bodies, people said drained of blood, but in reality it seems that a lot of blood was removed. It wasn't quite literally the case that, you know, the bodies were totally evacuated of blood. It was sort of semi-removal in many respects, but it created this mythology that the chupacabra was quite literally draining animals of all their blood. And that's why it's become known as like a vampire type creature. And the history of it is kind of intriguing, because unlike Bigfoot or the Abominable Snowman or the Loch Ness Monster, which have legends going back many, many years, as I said, it was only really in the mid-1990s that the chupacabra story really took off. Now, on the island of Puerto Rico, there were stories in decades past of one creature that became known as the Mocha vampire. Mocha's an area on Puerto Rico. And there are also stories of things that became known as devil birds. And some people have suggested the possibility that maybe these were simply earlier sightings of the same creature before the name chupacabra was created, if you like, and became what today really is sort of like a cultural aspect of Puerto Rican society in many respects. Now that's another picture of the chupacabra done by a friend of mine named Simon Wyatt, who's a comic book artist from Wales. And I put that one up to compare it with the other one. The big difference, as you'll obviously see, is that this one kind of has like backlight wings. Now, this is one of the controversial areas of the story of the chupacabra, that some people have said that when they've seen the creature, it seems to have these membrane-type wings under its arm. Certainly not the type of wings where the creature could probably take flight, but almost like vestigial wings or flaps of skin. Now, obviously some people say, well, why isn't that reported in all the cases? And that's a good question. You know, it may be possibly the idea that, you know, they could be folded back, and if somebody sees the creature late at night and these wings are folded back, they wouldn't see them. You know, if you quickly glance it, I don't know. It's one of these areas that provokes a lot of controversy, with some people saying that, you know, they're seeing something other than the chupacabra. And as I'll actually mention shortly, there are stories and indications that the chupacabra may not be the only weird creature on the island of Puerto Rico. Now, one of the things I always say to people with cryptozoology, I think one of the most important things is to try and get out into these locations where things are seen, to investigate them, because, you know, I think if we're going to get the answers, it's going to be by going out and to try and find those answers. Now, of course, sometimes most of us, you know, with work, etc., we're certainly not able to get out there for 3, 4, 5 months at a time, but a couple of weeks can certainly also, you know, gather a lot of information. And so that's what we try and do, is get out into the field, see what we can find out, speak to as many witnesses as possible, and really try and resolve what this might be. So this was where we went, our primary location in 2004, which is the El Yunque rainforest. As you can see, it's sort of a very lush, green, thick area of rainforest, and what I found when I went out there, or what I should say, what I found beforehand, most of my, I guess, exposure to the chupacabra in the mid-90s onwards was through reading books, magazine articles, seeing TV shows. But it's really only when you get out there that you begin to realise how seriously the subject's taken in Puerto Rico, and how your initial perceptions, which are just created from books and magazines and TV, actually change when you're exposed to the subject, and you see certainly different aspects of it, a different approach to it, and you know, you gather a different picture of what's going on. Well, most of the witnesses we spoke to in 2004, for example, the animals that have been found killed, goats, pigs, chickens, etc., were found dead in the farms in the lowlands, but most of the sightings of the chupacabra were found high here in the El Yunque rainforest. And several witnesses we spoke with said they felt that whatever this creature was, that it lives in the rainforest because it's so thick and dense, and uses that as cover during the daytime, and then comes down to the lowlands and the farms to hunt at night, which, you know, I guess makes sense. You know, it sounds feasible that that is the way that the creature would hunt and would hide out. One of the other reasons why that makes a lot of sense is that, unlike a lot of rainforests, jungles, etc., there actually isn't that much wildlife in the El Yunque rainforest. You know, there's nothing on the island of Puerto Rico like wild big cats or, you know, giant reptiles or anything like that. You know, you would imagine there would be, because it looks like some sort of Jurassic Park type location, but it's very sterile and quiet when you're in there. And so, again, the idea that something predatory and large obviously needs to eat, and there's not that much there unless it's a vegetarian, and, you know, without being biased, that doesn't look like a vegetarian to me. So I could be wrong, you know, but I don't think it is. So, you know, it's one of these situations where it needs food, so it's going to come down and look for the food. And as I said, but most of the sighting reports were from the El Yunque rainforest. And one of the most interesting was from this lady, a lady named Norca. Now, you know, I talked about most of the chupacabra sightings kicking off in the mid-90s. Norca had a sighting in 1975, and that previous picture, that was actually taken from her house. She's actually got a very big home, which is high up in the El Yunque rainforest, and it's sort of like a little treacherous journey to get up there. Me and John hired this little Jeep for the week, and you have to go around these winding roads, which are about, I don't know, almost about the width of that table, it seems, almost, and you know, sort of precarious journey up to the top of the rainforest, and then, you know, finally we found her house. And we sat with Norca for something like 2 hours as she related this story to us, how she'd been driving up from one of the towns, I think it was San Juan, which is the capital of Puerto Rico, and headed up to the rainforest. And as she was driving her car, headlights on, she literally had to come to a halt. She said this strange creature was literally just stood in the road and she just could not get past it. There was no way past the creature. And the way she described it afterwards, if any of you have ever seen the film Mimic, which is, it's a horror film, it's actually quite a good story. It's about giant cockroaches living under the New York subway system, and they only come out at night, and they're like 6 foot tall, and they kind of wrap their wings around themselves to make it look almost like they've got a raincoat on, so they look like a shuffling old man, and they kind of attack people and, you know, take the homeless people in the middle of the night and stuff like that. And she kind of described the creature in that way. She said it was almost looked cloaked, like a monk or something like that, she said. But she realised it had these large wings wrapped around it when the headlights hit it and the wings suddenly opened up wide like this. And she felt that the creature was almost taunting her and saying, well, if you think you can take me on, come and take me on. And she also got this feeling that she couldn't explain. It was almost, she said, like a created feeling of dread and terror that the creature was somehow instilling in her. It wasn't just terrifying to look at, it was almost as if it was creating a feeling of terror deliberately or in some fashion. She didn't know what to do. She just literally sat there in the car, and eventually the creature just shuffled off to the side of the road and vanished into the trees. Now, as I said, this was 1975. She'd never seen anything like this before or since, came across very, very credible, just wanted to know if we had any answers as to what it might have been that she saw. And of course, you know, the best we could say was that her story kind of fitted the type of reports that we'd heard numerous times before from other people. And, you know, unfortunately, witnesses, as I can understand, want answers, but I think if, as researchers, we're honest, we have to say we're still collecting data to try and determine, you know, what that answer is. I think we're still not really close enough, and I'll explain to you what I mean by that shortly, because there are a lot of different theories still, even today, as to what the chupacabra might be and what it might not be. Now, one of the things that's interesting about the chupacabra attacks is that they actually attract the attention of the officials on the island. This was a man that we also interviewed who used to work for the civil defence departments on Puerto Rico, and he'd actually responded in official capacity to chupacabra attacks on a number of occasions, where he had to visit farms and ranches and speak to the farmers, file reports, and bodies of the carcasses of the creatures that were killed had been shared with veterinarians who did tests and to determine how the animals were killed, reported finding these puncture wounds on the neck, bodies with blood removed, etc. So it's kind of intriguing that in the same way that in the US, for example, there was the Project Blue Book to investigate UFOs, to a degree at least, there's been official investigations on Puerto Rico. And of course, this has led to all sorts of theories about government cover-ups and conspiracies that, you know, possibly the government knows something about the subject and may have a great deal more knowledge than even the research community. Now, that was a location we visited where there was a man who bred peacocks, and he told us how he woke up one morning after hearing these strange screams in the middle of the night. He said he'd never heard anything like it, certainly not peacock screams or anything that he would associate with a regular animal on the island, but it was you can imagine somewhere like that at night, it's just pitch black, you know, no street lamps or anything. And then the next morning he got up and found all his peacocks dead, again with puncture wounds on the neck and blood removed from the animals. The interesting factor in this case, and in a lot of the cases, is that the bodies of the creatures aren't mutilated, mauled or eaten. Now, of course, you know, often a wild animal will attack regular animals for food. This doesn't seem to be the case unless it's just the blood that they're after, which is a suggestion that's been made, you know, it's just purely the blood. So we have this situation where he reported also to the civil defence people the fact that his peacocks had been killed. They came out, did an investigation at his house, and again, unfortunately, couldn't really offer him any answers beyond the fact that, well, sorry sir, that your animals are being killed, but, you know, we don't know what it was and there's really not much we can do about it, which I guess, you know, is the situation you're going to find when you're dealing with an unknown animal.